Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Jeff Harrell, and I'll be the host and moderator of today's webinar, Leveraging Threat Intelligence in Security Monitoring. Before we begin, I'd like to cover some basics and logistics. Today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour, including a question and answer segment for the Q&A. Please use the questions button at the top part of the Bright Talk interface to submit your question. We'll answer as many questions as time permits. If your question isn't answered, please feel free to email us your question to the email address at the end of the presentation. We'd also appreciate it if you'd provide a rating and any feedback you might have on the content of the webinar, which you can do by clicking the ratings button. If you think this webinar will be of interest to your colleagues, please use the Share This button to invite them to view the recorded version, which will be available within a few minutes after the conclusion of this webinar. I'm here today with Mike Rothman of Securosis, who's going to give you an unbiased view from his point of view, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Norse and our technology towards the end. So now I'd like to turn it over to Mike. Mike, you want to introduce yourself?
No, can't do that. I'm kidding. It's great to be here. One of the things Jeff didn't mention about the ratings is that, we're interested in 5-star ratings. So, it's like buying a car, right? They only need the 5-star ratings, and J.D. Powers will rate this. So, aside from my sophomoric humor, it is great to be here today. Really talk about threat intel, talk about security monitoring, which is certainly two of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to folks about. I spend a lot of time researching, really understanding what's working, what's not working, and I am excited to share a lot of what I've been figuring out, and really kind of explaining a lot of the things that we documented in a research paper that we published earlier this year, amazingly enough, called Leveraging Threat Intelligence in Security Monitoring. So I know you can get that from our pals at Norse. So at the end of the presentation, I'll refer to it a number of times because obviously in a 25, 35 minute presentation, I can't get into the depth that we can in a much larger type of form factor like a paper. So I will allude to a number of things that are really explained in great detail in the paper. So as we jump into it, let me first tell you a little bit about who I am and what I do. As Jeff introduced me, I represent a small research boutique called Securosis. We focus specifically on information security. That's all we do. It's our passion. It's what we've been doing for many years. All of us are 20-plus year guys in the technology and the security industry. We have heads full of gray hair and have earned a lot of the road rash that we carry with us. We really focus on being pragmatic, right? So it's not about, hey, you could do a million things, or this vendor saying that, or that vendor saying this. It's really about, this is, based upon what folks are really doing. This is what works, and this is what we think is the best path for folks to take. And me personally, as I mentioned, I've been in this space for 20 plus years. Started out as a programmer, ended up, kind of getting into networks early on, before, kind of IP was everywhere and this whole Ethernet thing, when there's still a question about what technologies were going to win. I was in the space doing networking stuff, and then, just because I was around, I ended up starting to learn about network security, and that was probably, close to 20 years ago, and I've been doing this ever since. So it really is something that I do enjoy. Every time I try to get out of the security business, I get pulled back in. But that's okay because I love it. So let's start. We do like to start most of our presentations with a little excursion to the meme generator, which is one of my favorite websites out there. And this one, I just really love, right? Advanced attackers, and you have your pimply-faced orange belt, telling them to bring it, right? We really want to see what you guys have, because I thought this was actually a very interesting contrast to how we usually view the attackers, right? In most cases, we view the attackers as the pimply-faced orange belt sitting in his parents' basement, kind of attacking things, right? And we're the good guys, and we have a leg up on these folks. But I think this is much more apropos to where we are as a practice, where we are as an industry relative to defending against advanced attacks. So again, we sit there and say we want the attackers to bring it, but what we have to be is very cognizant of the fact that a lot of these adversaries nowadays kind of know what they're doing. Right, the attacks are better than the defenses. That's the first point. Advanced attackers, they have more resources, they have more time, they understand what their mission is. They can go after, specific people in your environment. They can take advantage of holes that you haven't necessarily had the time, the resources, the expertise, or the funding to actually address. Right, so it's one of these things where you kind of have to go into it, and that's why we favor security monitoring as a philosophy, as something that is very, very important from the standpoint of what it is that you do to ensure that you know what's happening, that you have some awareness of what's going on in your environment. But we'll get into what we mean by monitoring as we move forward. For the purposes of where we are right now, we got to understand that we're not going to be able to stop all of the attacks that are coming towards us, right? 100% security's never been realistic. Nowadays, it's even less realistic. So we've got to grapple with that. Yet, what can we do? We can look for attacks. Right? We can look for things that we know are bad, and there's a lot of different ways that we can figure out how things are bad, but that's really where threat intelligence comes into the mix, and we'll explain exactly what we mean by that as well. But the fact of the matter is there are a couple things that are coming together to make most organizations much more effective in terms of understanding what it is that they're going to be targeted by, who it is that they're going to be targeted from, and ultimately, what tactics those adversaries are going to use against us. And then if we've got the right kind of data in place, then we'll be in a position to deal with it. But let's not get the cart before the horse, proverbially, and let's kind of go back into remedial advanced attacker school, right, and talk a little bit about the kill chain. So this is something that Mike Cloppert of General Dynamics came up with a couple of years ago. It just makes a lot of sense. It's a very easy metaphor to understand for how the attacks have really evolved over time. So what he mapped out was really a 6-stage process, starting with recon, which is basically just figuring out what is happening in your environment, coming up with some kind of exploit based upon their recon to, weaponize in a way that will allow you to get to the next place, which is to deliver the attack to the target. Right, so again, they're doing recon to figure out where the weak spots are. They're building a weapon to take advantage of those weak spots. They're delivering the weapon to wherever it needs to be delivered, and then they're exploiting the device. Right, so that's where a lot of the interesting things start to happen. That's where they're taking over devices. Maybe they have a remote access Trojan. Maybe there's some other mechanism of controlling the device. Maybe it's just taking random instructions from the botnet, what have you, but you've got an exploited device in your environment. Then you've got a C2, which is command and control. That means command and control, and that's basically how the botnet masters or the people who run the compromised device communicate with the compromised device within your environment, and then ultimately you have exfiltration, right? If we break any of those links, right? If you can stop recon, which you really can't, then you could break the kill chain. If you can, make sure that the weapon doesn't get delivered to somebody that's going to be vulnerable to it, you can break the chain that way. You can catch the exploitation. You can detect and block the command and control traffic. Ultimately, you can stop the exfiltration as well. So you've got lots of opportunities to get in the mix and to intervene within the kill chain before you actually lose data. But most folks aren't very good at doing that, right? So that's why we have this problem. And by the way, we sit there and talk about this as being just kind of a linear specific type of attack. In many cases, there are multiple complexities within this kind of kill chain, right? There's all sorts of different ways to weaponize. There's all sorts of different ways to deliver. So it's not like, hey, I close one door, they'll come in through a window, they'll burrow underneath your house, they'll dig in through the sewers. So there's lots of different ways for the adversaries to achieve their mission. We have to be aware and understand the reality of, kind of the fact that we're probably not going to be able to stop them reliably every single time, which forces us to, again, as we say here, right, look for those indicators, maybe even be a little bit more proactive and hunting, right? Hunting is a new term that everybody likes to use, of having people that are really out there trying to find the attackers preemptively and proactively within your environment, looking for those indicators, kind of without kind of seeing the manifestations of the attack, to go out and hunt for these folks. But regardless of what you want to do, in effect, what you have to have is the set of security data to be able to figure out what's happening in your environment, right? Even if you know what you're looking for, if you're not collecting the data, you really won't be able to find it, right? So security monitoring isn't new. We've been looking for attacks for years. I mean, we've had SIM, or Security Event Management, SIEM, back in its first generation, for 12 years? Almost 15 years now. First it was introduced to reduce the noise of our intrusion detection devices, and then firewalls and all sorts of other log and event sources. But now these tools have evolved to provide, pretty advanced correlation, analytics, alerting, and basically allow you to, really look for things that are attacks. Right? Look for things that look an awful lot like something that really shouldn't be happening within our environment. It's pretty straightforward in terms of how you use these tools. They'll come with, 70, 80, 100, 150 different rules out of the box that you can use to look for things like privilege escalation, look for things like, compromise or malware, or, kind of new accounts, lots of different ways that you could detect an attack, different flows within your network that kind of are uncharacteristic of what it is that you usually see from that standpoint. But again, one of the one of the features, because as an old software guy, what I can tell you is that if you can't fix something, what you need to do is feature it. So one of the features of SIM is that if you really know what you're looking for, it does a pretty good job of finding it. But what happens when you don't know what you're looking for, right? So if you're kind of not expecting to see an alien group having a party, right? Again, that's probably something you're not expecting. It's hard to sit there and say, oh God, I got 150 rules in my SIM. Why don't we look for the aliens having a party rule? Right? You're probably not going to get to that level of rule. You've probably done, probably a million other rules before you would get to the alien having a party rule. So the reality is, you may stumble across an alien having a party, right? In your environment, and you probably weren't looking for that. Right, so what you have to do, and obviously aliens having a party, you're going to create some mess, and they're going to create some problems within your environment. So what you want to do is try to, benefit from the misfortune of others. And this is a concept that we kind of use to, make it easy to understand what threat intel or threat intelligence can do for your environment. So I busted out the meme generator again. We got some Office Space action going on here, right? You're telling me no one has ever seen this before? And that's really the concept behind benefiting from the misfortune of others. That's really the concept behind threat intelligence, which is the fact of the matter is, if you're not kind of the Department of Defense, if you're not a Fortune 5 bank, if you're not one of the defense contractors, odds are somebody else is going to see an attack before you do. Right? Odds are the adversaries are going to use their really fancy and special stuff against folks that actually have real security game. And not to say that you don't have real security game. If you're not one of those folks, you very well could have a world-class security program implemented and in place. But the likelihood is that you probably don't, right? The likelihood is if you're not one of those companies, you invest what you need to on security, and there's a reason for that, because it doesn't help you sell stuff for the most part, right? It doesn't help you kind of get more customers. It doesn't help you kind of do your job more efficiently. So for the most part, you're just trying to do is the bare minimum that you can in order to, get your job done. Right? So what threat intelligence does is it learns from some of those more forward or, higher profile or more frequently attacked environments. You can learn from them and take those patterns, take those attacks, take those things that those guys have seen before and apply them to your environment. So it is kind of like looking into the future. It just happens to be your future. It's a defense contractor's past, but it's your future. So hopefully that makes sense. But again, somebody in many cases has seen the attack before, and therefore you should be able to know what you're looking for, and then be able to really shorten the window of attack, right? So threat intelligence actually allows you to detect attacks, earlier, because you know what to look for. You know what kind of the latest and greatest of these attack aspects are. You know what the indicators look like. You know what the bad botnets that are emerging, you know those addresses. You know the kind of malware that they're using. You know the tactics and the attack chain that they're using, and then you can start looking for that stuff within your environment, right? And even better, and the thing that I really like the most about this whole concept of threat intelligence is that it is inherently an information sharing type of situation. And security folks have always been very, very resistant. Again, I've been doing this for a long time, right? Security folks have always been very, very resistant to sharing information. Ooh, I don't want to tell them what I'm doing. Ooh, I don't want to, kind of put my cards out on the table in terms of, how it is that I protect myself. I don't want to do any of that. But because you can use, in many cases, third parties, because you can use information sharing and access centers out there, ISACs, that are out there, many in your own industry, in order to really leverage this information, it provides a much easier, much less icky, right? That's a very scientific term, right? Less icky way to feel good about sharing some of the information, so that it's not necessarily attributable directly back to you, but this third party is able to aggregate it again, whether it's your ISAC, whether it's a commercial third-party threat intel shop, whatever it is. It allows you to shorten the window between when somebody gets attacked, when you get attacked, and when you know what you should be looking for within your security monitoring environment. So let's talk a little bit about the sources of threat intel that you can leverage, right? So obviously there are compromised devices. If you have a device that looks an awful lot like something that is doing something bad within your environment, like recon or delivering exploits to your other devices within your environment, that's usually probably an indication that something bad's going on, right? Malware indicators, you can certainly get intel based upon what other organizations are being attacked with. So maybe that's a file base, maybe it's a set of indicators of compromise relative to what the actual malware does, as opposed to what it looks like, because polymorphism actually makes it hard to specifically nail down a specific piece of malware. Reputation, so it could be IP address reputation, could be file reputation. Just if you know it's bad, then you keep that score there. And ultimately command and control networks as well. There's a lot of information out there about what the botnets are that relates to IP reputation, but also the different patterns that they use, the domain generating algorithms that they deploy in order to connect between the compromised device and the bot network. So lots of different places that you can get threat intel from, lots of different ways that it can be delivered. I'm pretty sure Jeff's going to get into a bunch of these things in terms of where Norse does, and the breadth of the data that they have and how they can deliver it into your environment. So I will defer that to my man Jeff for later on. Let's talk a little bit about the challenges before we jump into how your process actually has to work, which is really the object of the paper that we wrote, right? So the challenges, obviously integrating the data. So, you may have a monitoring environment, you have a whole mess of threat intel. How do I make those things work together? So we'll talk a little bit about that later on, and I know Jeff will talk about that too. You've got to make sure that your rules and your alerts and your reports are updated accordingly, right? Remember, a SIM is wonderful at finding things as long as you know what you're looking for, right? So now I've got this threat intel thing, and it's telling me what to look for. I've got to make sure that I'm updating, kind of the rule base and the reports and the alerts so that they're reflecting the new information that I am getting. And preferably you don't want to do that manually, right? If you have somebody who's just sitting there processing and tuning rules or changing rules within your SIM, that's really not going to scale, right? And then triage and validation, that's still a challenge because, again, there was this whole drive towards this concept of real time for a long time, right? We're real time. They're backward looking indicator. Oh, we do things in real time. And then I would talk to a bunch of customers and I would say, hey guys, there are these things and they can generate pseudo real time alerts, like, within, minutes, maybe sometimes even seconds. And they're like, yeah, don't care. What? Learning about something, getting an alert in seconds, that isn't interesting to you? And they go, well, Mike, I'm resource constrained, right? I have people and they've got a backlog of, on a good day, a couple days, on a bad day, a couple weeks of things that we know are already bad, right? That have to get addressed. So you've still got to go through that process. Even if you fire the alerts faster, you still have to be properly resourced and have a process in place that allows you to actually triage and then validate that the attack has actually happened, that the device has been compromised, or that something is behaving badly in your environment. So again, don't want to poo-poo on these things. What I want to do is point out the challenge that you'll have, because the closer and the shorter, you make that window, right? And that's the whole objective of layering threat intel into a security monitoring program, which makes perfect sense. You still have to have the resources in place to be able to do the work that kind of emanates out of the alert. So I will leave that at there, and then what we can do is kind of jump into the process. So, you ready? Boom! Yes, it's a process. Yes, there are a lot of boxes in there. Yes, there are a lot of things that you need to do. Yes, what I do suggest is that you do check out the threat intelligence and leveraging threat intelligence in security monitoring paper, because what we do is we actually pick apart each one of these different boxes, right? And we talk about kind of a network security monitoring process that we built a couple of years ago, and then we kind of talk about how we evolve it to become this, right? Which involves gathering the threat intelligence and aggregating your security data, right? And we'll dig into each one of these, but at a high level, right? But if you're not aggregating your security data, if you're not gathering your threat intelligence, those are really the base. That's the foundation of any kind of security monitoring and analytics type of program that you have going on now. Then you get to the analytics stage where we want to analyze the data, leverage the threat intel as we've been talking about, prioritize my alerts. If I need to, get into deep forensic, and that really gets into, deep collection really refers to a forensic type of analysis on a device or on a, specific network type of environment. And then we get to action, which is to validate and then ultimately to escalate the incident. Right? So again, if it really is an incident, if it's been validated based upon the alert that I'm getting, maybe driven out of threat intel, verified and substantiated with the aggregated security data that I have, at some point I'll say, oh crap, I've got to hit, or I've got to pull the flag, I've got to hit the red button, whatever, again, metaphor you want to use for that. What it really does is it, means it's got to go over to my incident response team at that point, which, by the way, depending on the size of your company, may be you, so the escalation wouldn't be that hard. But the fact is there are a lot of packaging and a lot of things that you need to do in order to do incident response. And one of the more recent research projects that I've done actually dealt exactly with this, which is how to do incident response with threat intel. So let's talk about threat intel. So again, we've got all of this stuff enumerated within the paper, but what we want to do is start by profiling the adversary. Who are the folks that are more likely to try to attack me? Right? That's what I need to know, because then I'll be able to infer some of their tactics. I'll know what their target is. Maybe I'll be able to get a feel for their mission. Then I'm going to gather samples from some of these threat intel sources that allow me to understand what it is that they're doing at a deeper level than, a nation state may be after me. Well, great. What are they after? Okay, that's why I have to do my adversary analysis. And then once I understand what they're after, what's the best way to get it and how have they done that in the past? Because, again, a lot of these folks can be profiled. A lot of these folks can be, in effect, modeled so you know what to look for. And that's not going to be 100% like anything else, right? They can change their tactics at any time, but it at least gives you a little bit of a head start to understand what they're looking for. Then you're going to analyze all that data and distill the intelligence that will come out of that. Now, again, this is a process that, in a lot of cases, you can do yourself, right? There's a lot of open source intel out there. There's a lot of different areas where you can gather. Again, there are ISACs which you can join, which then will give you information depending on the nature of your business. You may be on a list with the Department of Defense or the Department of Homeland Security in the U.S., which would give you access to some of that information. So again, lots of different places to get it, or you can go to a commercial provider which is going to do a lot of this function. They're not necessarily going to profile the adversary for you, but they're certainly going to gather samples, they're going to analyze the data, and they're going to distill the indicators of things that you can look for. In terms of the security data that you're going to want to look for, again, there's a process here. Enumerate everything in your environment, and that gets into discovery, and that gets into, really understanding where and what devices are important within your environment. Get the scope, develop your policies for what it is that you're going to gather, known patterns. So, what we're going to do is we want to look for things that we know are attacks, right? And remember, I said at first, one of the great powers of SIM technology, security monitoring technology, is that it tells you what you know to look for. It does a great job of finding, if you know what you're looking for. So those are the known patterns. You also want to deal with baselines. So there's a certain type of traffic that happens in your environment. You'd certainly want to take a baseline, not assuming that that's 100% kosher, because in many cases you'll already have adversaries in your midst. You just may not know it. So, we're not going to sit here and assume that that's the end-all be-all, but it gives you a place to start and look for different things that could be anomalous, that could indicate attacks. Then we've got data sources. Again, lots of things that we can gather: logs, events, network packets, endpoint telemetry, configuration, vulnerability, performance. Lots of different data sources that you can leverage in order to build up that base that, again, gives you information to look for once you get into the analytics phase. The good news is, due to the power of Moore's Law, a lot of the very fancy math and computation that is really required out of security analytics is not necessarily requiring a Cray supercomputer as we see in the picture there, right? So we want to automate the threat intel integration, and that's key. I talked about that before. We'll baseline our environment. We talked about that. Analyze the data. Fire an alert based upon what we see. And again, maybe it's a pattern that we know what we're looking for. Maybe it's something that's driven out of the threat intel. And then, as I referred to as well, we're going to, for specific devices, go to a deep collection mechanism. And again, maybe that's just capturing all of the packets that go to and from that device. Maybe it's pulling very specific endpoint telemetry off of that device. Maybe it's taking a forensic image of the device. But, that deep collection gives us the basis for investigation, basis for prosecution moving forward, and really pumps into the incident management program. So that is analytics. And then finally, we've got to verify the attack, right? Is it a compromised device or a false positive? And then if we were to go back to the process map, which we can do really quickly there. What you see is this arrow there from validate back up to intelligence collection, which is really about evaluating and constantly tuning the intel that you use in your environment. And that becomes very important because, again, you're making an investment in this, not only in what you're paying to get the intel, how much it costs you to integrate into your system, but also the cost of validation and action there. So if you've got false positives, that costs you a lot of money. So you want to constantly be evaluating your intel to make sure that it's strong, right? To make sure that you're getting the value out of it that you need. Because, again, you want to constantly improve your ability to respond. You want to constantly tune those thresholds within your security monitoring program. You want to constantly make sure that you're spending money and spending time on the things that will yield risk mitigation in your environment. And that means you should be really evaluating everything that you do on an ongoing basis and constantly trying to refine that. So let's talk about, how do we get started with this, right? And there's a whole section in the paper on quick wins that goes through a very detailed scenario for how you can integrate threat intel into your existing security monitoring program and tune that process to really make it reflect and look like what we were talking about here, right? But first we start with, again, looking for the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that we know is bad, and that's compromised devices. So, maybe they're communicating with IP addresses that we know are malicious or part of a botnet, right? Maybe they're looking for those command and control channels through patterns that we know are indicative of callback traffic, right? Those are the things that, again, tend to be the easiest to find, right? So we can find those devices, then we know we have a problem, then we can kickstart our investigation to understand the breadth of the issue, how much the malware and or adversary has proliferated within your environment, and it gives you a real basis to start moving forward and fixing your environment. So that's really kind of the first thing that you should do, is just find the devices that you know are owned within your environment and move forward to fix those. Then you can start looking for how these devices deviate from the baselines that you've set up, right? We talked about gathering baselines when we were gathering our security data and then doing some of the analytics on it. Well, what we want to do is start looking for things that don't fit into those baselines. Somebody in finance shouldn't be into, kind of the sales system at any given time, right? Certainly not, most of the time. Or, you don't want to see somebody on the shop floor, mulling around the HR system and looking at payroll records, right? Those are internal indicators that something could be funky just based upon traffic patterns, right? You may not want to see a big file transfer of 5 gig of data in the middle of the night, to a place in Chechnya, right? Those things would deviate from your baseline, because that doesn't happen very often, right? So those are the things that you can start to look for that give you an idea that you may have a problem, right? That's another quick win. Could be, again, the threat intel aspect of that could be the malware that you see on some of these devices. It could be, that would cause something to move from the baseline or, cause drift from a configuration standpoint. All these things can be validated, verified, and triggered, from the integration of threat intel into your environment. And then the adversary analysis helps to identify the patterns to watch for. So again, if you're in something that has very specialized intellectual property, well, odds are an adversary is going to be interested in that. Great. So how am I protecting that? What kind of attacks am I looking for? Who would be the adversary that would be most likely to be interested in that kind of thing? Perfect. Then I know who that is. I know what tactics they tend to use. And then, of course, they'll change them. Right? But that's the cat and mouse game that we all play all the time. So that's what we have to be aware of from that standpoint. But again, there are a lot of different quick wins that you can get and that you can yield, again, from leveraging threat intel in your security monitoring environment. So how do we get sustainable value? Right? Because this is what we want to do, right? We don't just want to get, we'll get the threat intel, it'll tell us what bad things happen, and then, we'll move on to the next shiny object that shows up at the Black Hat Conference or at RSA in April next year, and you just got to have one of those, right? What we're trying to do is build a process and nurture and evolve a process so that it does provide sustainable value to our environment. So what we want to do is integrate the machine data, right? We want to integrate the threat intel in a way that I don't have to get involved or an admin doesn't have to get involved. So you're looking probably for a standard protocol. From an industry standpoint, it seems that Styx and the messaging protocol Taxi that originated out of MITRE is gaining a lot of momentum out there in the market. So that's something that you want to pay attention to from that standpoint. So what you want to do is make sure that it's integrated in there and that you can, again, leverage this over time. You want the rules and the alerts to be, again, automated and automatically configured. So if you see something from threat intel that's looking for a certain pattern, you don't want to have to manually enumerate that within your SIM, right? You just don't want to do that. So what you want to be is in a situation where you're having that information pumped directly into your system, and then you can look for that kind of stuff. And then ultimately, as I mentioned before, you want to be able to look and constantly gauge and assess the efficiency and the effectiveness of your threat intel. You want reports based upon the number of alerts that, fired. X number were based upon threat intel. Y were actually, kind of compromises. And Z told me exactly what I needed to do to, work around or remediate the issue. Those are the kind of things that you want to be able to report on within your environment to ensure that you're getting the proper value out of your investments. So to summarize, adding value to existing security monitoring involves leveraging what's happening in other organizations that's benefiting from the misfortune of others. That's, kind of the meme. What do you mean nobody's ever seen this stuff before? Of course somebody's seen that stuff before, unless it's a true 0 day and then you're owned. So then hopefully your incident response process is up to snuff on that front, because no amount of security monitoring is going to help you in that case, right? Threat intel sources are increasing in availability and maturing rapidly. So we're seeing a lot better information. We're seeing a lot more information. We're seeing better integration with a lot of the tools that you would use your security monitoring platforms. You're seeing a lot of continued innovation on the part of visualization and understanding where a lot of these attacks are coming from, which gets back to helping you with adversary analysis. So again, it's a pretty rapidly moving market, and I know Jeff will be able to talk a lot about what the trends that Norse is seeing. And you want to be able to automatically integrate a lot of this threat intel into your rule sets to make your efforts more efficient and effective. And again, automate, automate, automate. You'll hear the word automation a lot over the next couple of years because it's important pretty much within every aspect of security. But what I would say is that there really isn't a lot more places where it's more important than, with this idea of leveraging threat intel because, again, you just don't have the option. You don't have the resources. Your folks can't move fast enough to keep track of all the new types of malware, all the new botnet networks and changes in those IP address spaces. I mean, these things are changing, every couple minutes. So there's no way you can stay on top of that, kind of as a human. So you have to automate a lot of those things. So with that, I'll point you to a couple of things that you can learn more about the research that we're doing. There's our blog. Everything that we do is posted to the blog first. So we like our readers to poke holes in our research and tell us what we're doing wrong. Here's a little link to our research library. So we've probably written 50 some odd papers over the past 3-4 years on a variety of different security topics. So you can check out the list and see all those papers, and we'll make a deal for you, right? We, again, post everything on our blog. All of our papers tend to be, open, no registration, just download them, read them, get some value out of it. But what we do ask is that if you see stuff that doesn't reflect your experience or you want to learn more about something, interact with us, send us a note, put a comment on a blog post, what have you. Help us make our research better because then we can be more effective for you. So here's how you get in touch with me. There's my email. I do get on the Twitter every so often, so that is a link to that. And with that, I'll be around for questions later on. Let me hand it over to Jeff. Hopefully I didn't consume too much of the time. And take it away, my friend.
Thanks, Mike. Great presentation as always. I want to remind everybody, if you guys have any questions, please click on the questions button and drop them in there for us so we can talk about them after I finish my few short slides. We'll put them in there either from myself about Norse or Mike. We'll be happy to answer them. So I want to talk a little bit about how Norse is different from some of the other threat intelligence companies that are out there. We do what we call live attack intelligence. It's our, kind of our own flavor of threat intelligence. A little bit more proactive, we feel like. There's a lot of companies out there that will do research for your particular company, come up with a very large report based on what they see is happening to your organization, who they think is attacking, that sort of thing. That's not really what we do. We're mostly focused on automated threat intelligence. So all of our processes are automated around gathering and also in delivering, and I'll explain a little bit more about that. Some of you may recognize our live map there. If you go to map.ipviking.com with your web browser, you can pull it up and see the attacks in real time. And what you're looking at there is we have an infrastructure all over the world that gathers threat intelligence, and the map actually displays less than 1% of the data that we're seeing. So we see a whole lot of data every day that we're processing and then making actionable and delivering to our customers. So if you're checking out the map, you can see a lot of the attacks in real time. So we have this infrastructure that we've built over the past 10 years. It's all over the world in over 160 data centers, over 40 countries. We process over 130 terabytes of data a day. And you might be thinking, as Mike said, what can I do with all this data, right? Well, on the back end, in the Norse cloud, we call the dark matter platform, we actually process all of that information and give each of the IP addresses and URLs and things like that, domains that are doing bad things. We give them a score from 0 to 100. And then that's what we deliver, that along with some very critical context to our customers so they can make better decisions. And we will talk a little bit about how we integrate that with the existing security solutions, which ties right into what Mike was talking about as well. So we have what we call organic dark intelligence, and what we mean by that is organic, meaning it's all ours. We grew it. We found it out there on the internet. We're not aggregating open source feeds or anything like that. We're not taking data from our customers' networks. It's actually things, indicators, bad IPs, bad URLs, bad domains that we've actually found out there in the wild, a lot of times in the dark nets. So we're gathering as much as we can of that, and we're talking about all sorts of things. We're talking about malware, botnets, bogus IPs, Tor exit nodes, other sorts of anonymous proxies. Basically, anything that's bad that's happening on the internet, we try to gather as much information about it as we can. And I kind of alluded to this earlier, but we're not gathering the data from our customer networks like a lot of other vendors are. That's certainly useful data, especially if you've got a huge customer network. Then it's really good to see what's going on in those networks. But we're actually looking, our microscopes our telescopes are pointed the other direction. We're looking at what's going on the internet, and especially in the dark net. So it's a little bit different perspective, and of course it takes a lot more infrastructure to do that because we're looking all over the internet space. But we're trying to gather all of that and then distill it and deliver it to our customers. So let's talk a little bit about how it's delivered. We take that 130 terabytes plus per day of the intelligence that we're gathering. We analyze it in the dark matter platform. And one of the things that it would be good to kind of interject here, this is something that we really couldn't even be done, even 5 years ago. Before big data really came about and the ability to offload processing onto graphics chips that can do these things, this kind of processing a lot faster, it wasn't even possible. So being able to analyze and process and deliver this much data this quickly is something that's just recently come about. So I always find that part pretty interesting. So we take all this data, we analyze it. Within 5 seconds, we make it available to our customers. So that's within 5 seconds of us seeing something bad on the internet, we make that available to our customers through an API. And we deliver it into three products. Starting at the bottom there, Dark List is our kind of list of bad IPs, and it includes the IPs, where they are in the world, and a score. And that's the top 3 to 5 million worst IPs on the internet. And we'll talk a little bit more about what people do with that in a moment. Dark Viking is more transactional, so you can integrate that in line with something like a login or a financial transaction, where you basically send the IP to us and we respond with, here's what we've seen on it, and here's the score. So you can decide whether to continue that financial transaction or block it or ask for more information or what have you. And then finally, Darkwatch is our new appliance. We just came out with it right before Black Hat. It's designed to protect people from inside a company's network from clicking on bad URLs, going to bad websites, and that sort of thing. So with Dark Viking, again, it's very transactional. Dark Viking and Dark List are both API capable, so you just integrate those into whatever you're using, and we'll talk about the integrations on the next slide. But Dark Viking has just a ton of information about every IP we see, so up to 5 years of history on an IP, so we could say, we saw it was part of a botnet, and last year, in January of this year, we noticed that it was using a bogus IP, and now it's got malware on it. So that's a critical context that shows you a history of badness on that particular IP address or URL. Darklist is, like I said, it's the list of bad IPs, the 3 to 5 million worst IPs on the internet, and usually that's used to either block on an edge device, or you can put it into your SIM, so you can connect your internal security events with things that we're seeing on the external internet. And then we just mentioned about Darkwatch, which is focused on preventing things from getting into your network. So very importantly, Mike mentioned SIMs quite a bit. That's probably the place where you see, aside from our appliance, that's where you see most of our customers using our threat intelligence. they'll take Darklist and put it into their SIM. So a good example is, let's say, and actually Mike alluded to this a little bit. If you see, maybe a sales guy's laptop is sending a lot of data outside the network, by itself that may not be a big deal, right? It could just be him uploading his daughter's soccer game video to Dropbox or something like that. But with the threat intelligence that Norse provides, we'll be able to show you that, hey, that data is going to an IP in Romania, which is, it's got a high score on it. So what we can do there is help you prioritize the things that you're seeing, because everybody knows if you've got a SIM, you've got tons and tons of alerts and you've got lots of information. It's really hard to deal with it. So knowing that external context, that critical external context, can help you prioritize the things that you're seeing so that you can really take action on the ones that are most important. Just our obligatory partner slide here. We do have a lot of integrations with SIMs, next generation firewalls, even very fast network cards in the case of SolarFlare. So love to talk to you about this in more detail if you have any questions. But for now, let's just go on to the questions. Let's see what we got here. Mike, let me throw this one over to you. What's the difference between cyber intelligence and threat intelligence, if anything, and does it matter?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was trying to be kind to everybody, and yeah. So I'm back, guys. I'm back. The point here, I think, is it's a delineation. I mean, if I wanted to get kind of very constructive, from that standpoint, cyber would be a little bit higher level, qualitative, kind of information. Cyber, something that would come out of an alert that you would get, kind of in a briefing report, first thing in the morning, where kind of threat intel could be perceived to be something that's much more machine-like, set of IPs, malware indicators, those kind of things. But the reality is a lot of it gets back to how you're going to use it. And some organizations, just view it as a number of different types of intelligence sources that then you figure out how you're going to use it. Right? A lot of that so-called cyber intel is going to be very useful from an adversary analysis standpoint, whereas what we could sit there and say is threat intel would be very useful, again, for things that you're going to integrate directly into your SIM or your monitoring platform.
Yeah, exactly. Good answer there. So another question here, I'll take this one. What factors do you use to score the threat of an IP? Actually, we use over 1,500 different factors, but they kind of boil down into to a few. I'll just give some examples from the location of the IP in the world. Some places are just more prone to have malicious IPs than others. What type of badness we're seeing, right? So a good example is a Tor exit node. By itself, if you see an IP that's coming out of a Tor exit node, that's not going to give it a super high score. But if you're a financial institution, you really want to know about that because there's a very high correlation between fraud and the use of anonymous proxies for financial transactions. So it's more important to financial industries maybe than it would be to some others. But that definitely would have something to do with the score. Certainly, if it's got malware on it as part of a botnet, that's going to give it a very high score as well. And coming from a bogus IP as well, that would cause the score to go way up. Let's see. A couple more questions here. One of the questions is Darklist supported on open source software like Spam Assassin, etc. I should make sure to make a point that the APIs that we use are standard XML, JSON, so you can absolutely use it in pretty much whatever you want. In fact, you can just use curl commands to do it manually from a terminal window. Let's see. Mike, here's another one that you kind of touched on a little bit, but maybe you can talk about it in a little more detail. What are your feelings about the standards like Stix and Taxi or OpenIOCs?
Sure. Yeah. That's actually a great one. The reality is I think a lot of it gets back to, momentum, right? And standards and obviously things can change, here and there, but it does seem that, sticks and taxi are starting to gain some momentum. You're starting to see a lot of tools that are out there, really starting to use that, descriptive language as a way to integrate with other tools. I've had people talk about, well, what about, common event format or CEF, and especially if you're dealing with a bunch of the SIMs, you hear about OpenIOC, you hear about, kind of a lot of other, Cybox, which is actually a subset of, or kind of the basis for sticks. So, again, there's a lot of different options out there. There's a whole bunch of proprietary integration, formats that folks are using. But if I had to make a bet right now at this point in time, I would say that, sticks and taxis seem to be gathering a sufficient amount of momentum to think that, that has a pretty good shot at becoming, at least one of the key standards. And again, most of the tools that you're going to, deal with are going to support, at least multiple integration points. But, you do want to push them towards a single standard. And the thing about that I do like about sticks is that, yes, it's complex. But it is also very flexible, and it can map to almost any kind of, information source and intelligence source that ultimately, kind of ends up emerging out there. And that's what you want. A lot of these proprietary integration capabilities, require inhuman acts when data formats change or when requirements evolve. Whereas, just the nature of how sticks was designed kind of insulates it a little bit from that. But, obviously the penalty for that is some initial complexity up front. But again, if I was a betting man, I would be betting on sticks and taxi.
Yeah, and we are. We've been working pretty closely with the guys at MITRE and at FSISAC to get our Avalanche server set up. And we're not quite finished yet, but we are starting to test it. So as soon as it's a requirement from a customer, we can pretty much turn it on. So yeah, we absolutely agree that there's got to be some sort of common format because there are certainly a lot of threat intelligence companies right now. One more question: how are you integrating human intelligence into your threat information holdings? And if not, why not? We actually are. Most of the data that's available to our customers via the APIs right now is virtually all of that is automated. But we are starting to include some human intelligence in some of the reports we're doing. We have a pretty big report coming out in a couple of months here, so keep an eye out for that. That will include quite a bit of work from our human intelligence guys. But as to why we're doing it kind of separately right now, again, it's about automation. We're just able to gather and process and then deliver much more information much quicker, and then what we'll be doing in the future is kind of adding to that with our human intelligence side. That looks like all the questions I think we can answer right now. So great. All right. So I really want to thank Mike for joining us. Thanks, Mike. Great presentation as always. I want to thank everybody who listened in as well. If you have any more questions or you want further information, please visit our website. I mentioned earlier that was going to be a email at the end, and I forgot to put it in there. So feel free to email your questions to jeff@norse-corp.com or Mike, because he put his email address in there. Either way, and we'll be happy to take care of you. The recording for this webinar will probably be up in about 5 or 10 minutes after this is over. So if you missed the beginning or you want to send it to somebody, please feel free to do that. So again, thanks everybody for your time, and have a good day.